Today I'm going to be speaking to Gordon Giltrap. Just a little bit of a heads up on the sound quality of the recording. I've had to do a lot of editing on this to get Gordon's sound up, so hopefully it'll be okay. I've also done this in two separate sections, so I'm going to release them more or less back to back. But if you're like me and you like to sort of listen to podcasts while you're in the car, this one may require you to listen at home. I don't know, we'll see how it goes. But anyway, really good chat. Gordon sort of really opens up about what influences he's had and his sort of aspect about music and the sort of spirituality and all the rest of it. And it's a fascinating chat with him. So let's get on with the interview. So today I'm going to be interviewing Gordon Giltrap. Hi, Gordon.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm in good form, thank you. Yes, and mustn't grumble during these troubled times.
Yeah. So, Gordon, my first question, my traditional first question is, what do you do?
Yeah, what do I do? That's a very good question. What have I been doing for the last 54 years? Up until COVID, of course, I was doing concerts and teaching and composing and recording. It's been a very fruitful experience generally. It's been great. Yeah.
So I want to normally what I do is you're interested in music and stuff. Obviously that's the sort of line that I'm sort of intrigued by, but it might veer off into wherever it's going to go, this conversation. Mm-hmm. So did you start playing guitar? Was that the first thing you did, musically?
It was. It started out, it's interesting because I listened to the interview you did with my pal Ray Burley.
Yeah.
And Ray Burley and I got a similar experience because we both started out playing on these plastic guitars that you bought from Freeman's catalogs.
Yeah.
And they're basically, the interesting thing was they were basically a 3/4 size ukulele, 4 strings, all plastic. Mine had a picture of Elvis Presley on the headstock, and his had a picture of Tommy Steele.
You didn't tell me that.
And it came with a clamp. Once you've learned how to tune the thing with the pitch pipe, you put the clamp on and press the buttons, and it's supposed to form the chords. I couldn't get on with that.
Right.
So that was really my first stringed instrument. And of course, the interesting thing was it was made by the company that Mario McAferry started.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because he started his plastics company. That's how he made his fortune.
Right.
And of course, you didn't know that at the time. And they do fetch a lot of money now, not a lot, but they're collectible, like antiques, which makes me think I'm an antique as well. So that was my first introduction. And what that instrument did for me was it taught me the mechanics of how to make music on a stringed instrument. Because I saw these things, these lines across the fingerboard, and thought, what are they for? And then I pressed it down, I thought, that's how the notes change. And I just put it into a tuning. It's like I was doing open tunings when I was 9, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it gave me a lot of pleasure, just playing this thing. And when I was 12, my mum bought me my first proper 6-string guitar, which was an arch-top jazz guitar made by the Martin Coletti company. It's probably made in Italy or Germany. It wasn't like the original pre-war Colettis that were wonderful. And that came with a set of pitch pipes and a book. And the book I got was written by a man called Jeffrey Sisley, and it's called First Steps.
Right.
And it taught you how to tune it and how to finger your first chord. And I taught myself how to tune it. And I played my first chord, which was probably E minor or something.
Yeah.
I take great pride in it. And that's the way it's been ever since then, really, Vic. I haven't had a lesson in my life. to speak of. Everything was self-taught, hence the reason why I played the guitar incorrectly. You know about my technique, being a teacher
Yes,
yourself.
well, we'll talk about that, because
Yeah,
this is something that fascinates me, actually.
yeah, plectrum a little finger. That's the way
Yeah,
it started, the way it stayed.
yeah,
And I'll do a bit of name dropping here. I was chatting to Pete Townsend about this the other day, and Pete said, "I'm really intrigued with that technique you've got, Gordon, that pick and little finger." He said, "You're getting a lot going there." He says,
yeah,
"Really interesting, but it's all homemade. It's all
yeah,
wrong."
yeah,
And maybe if one believes in destiny, that was the right thing to do, because I had never listened. I mean, the first time I saw somebody playing with their fingers, I think it was John Remble actually.
right.
And that's and I thought, God, how novel! Oh, how novel! You've played with your fingernails. You don't use plectrums. And I really didn't know how they got all that stuff going. And I thought everybody that played the guitar got all that stuff going with the plectrum. So I was trying to do all this stuff, cross-picking with the plectrum, very crude, but it kind of worked. And then I thought, well, how can I get two notes together? So I thought, all right, why don't you use the other finger to play two notes simultaneously? And then that worked. I thought, oh, that's how they do it. And then that's how it developed. It hasn't changed. And many times I thought maybe I should learn a proper technique, but if I did that, I wouldn't have my sound.
Yeah.
It's created my signature sound
Right.
unknowingly.
See, this is actually something that I've always thought. Well, this has fascinated me, because when you're involved in education, there's this sort of you get this idea that there's a way of this is the way to do it type of thing, and then but with guitar, for everything that you say to somebody, that's not a good idea to do that technically, you'll find some astonishing guitar player who does exactly what you're telling them not to do. So it's really, certainly with contemporary guitar styles, it's like, well, you do your thing, and if that's how your technique develops, then that's how it develops. I think what's happened is that might have been true with lots of instruments, but because the classical system is such, and has been in place for so long, for most of the instruments, there is a sort of a systematized way of playing, whereas, of course, the guitar has been such a rebel, I think, for so long, that it's never got that. So, there's your technique and, whoever else, Gary Moore's technique of playing basically with two fingers, you sort of think, oh. And of course, when you look at people like Django Reinhardt, it's like, okay.
Exactly. Can I jump in there and just say
Yeah.
what you're saying is exactly right. I can understand why the orthodox way of playing evolved, because really it makes a lot of sense. It's so logical, particularly with classical guitar. But of course, as you know, with the steel string, you can put it into weird and open tunings and do anything you want with it, which you can't so much with the gut strum. We know we can tune down to D or whatever, but the strings, if you tune lower than that, they just flop around like elastic bands and they don't work. So you have that freedom with the steel string guitar, and I think that's wonderful. And I say to people, if it sounds right, it is right, and we don't have the right to say it's wrong. As a long-established teacher yourself and a very fine player, that is the case. And it's funny you mentioned Gary Moore. I mean, I don't think Gary Moore used his pinky on his left hand. It was all first, second, and third finger. And what a monster player! What a great virtuoso he was. Django, of course, we know that just those two fingers. And I was chatting with John Etheridge about this years ago, and he said, in some ways it was easier for Django because he didn't have any other options, so he made it work.
Exactly.
Obviously, there was a limit to what he could do, but in terms of the genre, he was the greatest, and there'll never be another one like it. Astonishing player.
Yeah.
So there you go. That all the rules go out the window, and I think Django alone has been an incredible influence on players. People like Tony Iommi. I mean, Tony used Django as an example when he lost the use of those, tips of those fingers on his,
Yes.
And he thought, well, if Django can do it, then I can do it. And I had a friend who damaged the two middle fingers on his left hand, the tips. And I said to him, look, you can get around this by using first and fourth finger, which I use a lot for hammering on and pulling off. And I wrote a piece for him called The Mariner's Tale, and I think it hopefully helped him over that hurdle.
Yeah.
Not completely, of course, but you go, well, look, you don't have to give up. You can still make music.
Yes. Yeah. You just. I mean, it comes down to what your perspective is on music, whether you are creating. It's what you are in the music, or whether you're chasing after what somebody else is doing in sound. So let's go back to, you've got your first musical instrument, and first guitar, actually. We got to that point, haven't we? So at this point, then, what's your main influence?
Well, what changed it all for me? I can tell you, I can name on the fingers of one hand my main influences. The first one really was Hank.
Yeah.
It was Hank Marvin, and then after that it was the Beatles with George Harrison, and then it was Pete Townsend.
Right.
So Pete was really, up until that point, the second major influence.
Yeah.
And then I discovered Bert Jansch in 1965 with his first album, and it changed my life.
Yeah.
I was listening to a lot of people prior to then, kind of popular folky people, although I'm not a folk musician, never have been, but people like Donovan and also Pete Seeger, Peter, Paul and Mary, Scottish traditional music. And that was kind of a pathway for me to go, because I thought I want to be a folk musician, I want to be a folk singer, mainly because I certainly couldn't cut it as a lead guitarist in a band. I didn't have the technique, but I like the idea of being self-contained. The era of the singer-songwriter Dylan, and you didn't have to rely on anybody else. You didn't have to worry about getting on with the drummer or the bass player, which is your own thing. That's where the creativity started, and I think people like the Beatles and Dylan gave us permission to do our own thing, because that was the birth of the singer-songwriter in this country. But it was Bert Jansch. It made me realize what could be done, the fantastic possibilities with one man and one guitar.
When you heard Bert Jansch, did you sort of do what often happens with people, where you hear a recording and you go, that can't be one person? Did you have that sort of, or did you actually sort of go, oh my God, that is one person?
Yeah, it never occurred to me it wasn't, because I knew it was just a straight voice and guitar.
Yeah, right.
I never questioned that. But what I did question, obviously, was how the hell is he doing that?
Yeah.
And then I used to do like we all did, and probably you did the same, because it was vinyl. I would slow the record down to half speed, work out what the notes were, try and replicate them, and think I'd got it right, when in actual fact it was all completely wrong. And when I saw Bert Jansch live, it just blew me away, because A, it sounded just like the record. B, he was playing up the dusty end of the guitar.
Yeah.
The dusty end, up the seventh, ninth, 10th positions.
Yeah.
I thought, and I was playing everything in first position, pretty much. Well, that's how he did it.
Yeah.
And I've got to tell you a quick story about Bert. God rest his soul. We became good friends, as have all the people that have influenced me in my life musically. I've got to know them. We've become friends. It's extraordinary. I feel very privileged. But I was around his house one day, and he'd just taken possession of a new Yamaha guitar, because Bert liked Yamahas. They were very solidly built, and it became part of his sound. And I was playing. I said, "Can I go on your new guitar?" He said, "Yeah, sure." And I was playing it, and I got beyond the 12th fret. This is the God's truth, Vic. I said, "Bert," I said, "the strings are flat on the fingerboard. It's completely unplayable beyond the 12th fret." And he said, "I don't play up there." You could have knocked me down with a feather. I thought, my God, this man changed my life with his music, and he doesn't play beyond the 12th fret. It's not that he couldn't.
No.
He had to to. You know, everything you wanted to do was up to the 12th fret. So in some ways, it's almost like the classical guitar player. How many classical players, unless you've got a guitar with a cutaway, is going to play beyond the 12th fret?
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
So
you do everything you need to do.
yeah, it's fascinating because we've got a phone call coming through. Yeah, there you go. Right. It's fascinating because when I said to you about listening to a recording and going, is that one person playing the guitar? It's just that I heard a couple of stories, one of them from Chas Hodges, actually, you know, Chas a Day, about listening to Chet Atkins. And, you know, they were convinced it was more than one guitar.
Well, I can believe that with Chet.
Yeah, exactly. So, and he said they'd been listening to these recordings, and it was like, Chas said, I had this sort of thought, is that on one guitar? And his mate said to him, no, it can't be. It's impossible, you know, that sort of thing. And the second part of that thing that you were saying about, you know, I don't play beyond the 12th fret, is that often with players that you admire, they do what they do. And but we always have an idea that they've got this other stuff, you know, that they do everything else, but they don't necessarily.
Very good point. Very good point.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting thing, because it's not like the sort of, you know, jack of all trades type of thing, which is what happens now when people, you know, they go to college or something and it's, you know, they've got to do a bit of this and a bit of, it's actually not, you know, and I'm sure this is true of a lot of contemporary players.
You're the first person I've actually heard say that, and I've thought this for a long time. You listen to people like Bert Jansch and you say, and the same thing can apply to me, right? You listen to him, you go, oh, what a great guitarist. No, Bert was not a great guitarist. He was a great creator on the guitar. And people say that about me. I've said it before in the past, and they think it's being false modesty, but I don't see myself as a guitarist. I see myself as someone who writes these tunes on the guitar. Now, having said that, you need a degree of technique and pretty good chops to do it. So I'm not going to take away from what I do and say, oh, I'm not that clever, right? Yeah, I've worked hard at it, like we all have, but I've worked hard at it in the early days, 12, 15 hours a day practicing, really, you know, to get my technique up enough for me to have the freedom to create the stuff I wanted to create. And it still applies. Now, I have stepped outside of that, and I think what proves that is when you try to play another person's material. If you can then do that, then you think, actually, I can step outside this box and I can do it. But not many people could. Bert didn't to a degree. I remember he did a John Renbourn piece called Lady Nothing, but he had to do his own thing on that. So Bert really, outside of that, he probably wasn't a great improviser. Renbourn was, because he was into jazz. But Bert probably not so much. Not a great improviser. And there's a lot of people like that. I tell you what is like that. Brian May.
Yes.
Tony Iommi. You take these people outside of their comfort zone.
Yes.
And they can't do it. But what they do is so wonderful and so unique. And every time I was in the presence of Bert Jansch, I was in awe of him. Even I'd known him for all these years, and I couldn't get out of that mindset of being in awe of him because of his creativity. And you just think of all the wonderful things he'd written. And you think, what kind of brain would approach the guitar in that way? You know? And of course, all these years on, I've got this body of work, and there are people outside, out in that world now that are playing my stuff. And I'm totally knocked out by that. And I think, God, they think it's good enough to want to spend time doing it. But I suppose I kind of earned that right. But it was a dream. And it's only in recent years that that's kind of come true in as much as being part of the RGT and being part of the syllabus.
Yeah.
And that's a real privilege, a real, and you just think, yeah, I think I've kind of made a mark now. If other people think your stuff is good enough and they want to spend the time learning it, then that's very special and a great privilege. But it's an interesting thing as you're saying about these people. They are great creators. It's the same with Townsend, Pete Townsend. You know, I've got to know Pete quite well recently, and we have a very close friendship outside of it. I mean, I'm not going to ring it up and ask you what strings he uses or what plectrum he uses. We talk about other things. We talk about books. We talk about spirituality. We talk about exactly what we're talking about today,
Yes.
how you create, you know. And he kind of put me in my place recently because I said to him, do you know, Pete, I write this stuff and I step back from it and I think, how did that happen? How did I write this? Of course, it's stages. You write a bar of music. You think, oh, what's going to come next? And people say to me, and I'm probably preempting the question you would ask me, how do I compose? And there's nothing clever about it. I just come up with a melodic idea and then try to sing where I think the next bit's going to go,
Right.
as opposed to dictating where my fingers normally would go. And then the next thing you know, it's like a jigsaw. It's something, and then finally the puzzle is finished, and you think, oh, I've got a 3-minute, 5-minute piece here. And I can't remember the stages of what I went through. You sort of think, well, what time did I write that piece of music? What day did I write that? What was my mindset? And because I suppose to a degree I'm a bit of a spiritual bod, like I think most people are that love music, you probably are as well. You sort of think, well, this comes from somewhere else. And I think it does come from a higher level of consciousness. You interpret that any way you will. And I mentioned this to Pete. I said, from somewhere else. He said, well, Gordon, he said, I'm going to turn it on its head. He said, it comes from your fingers, it comes from muscle memory, and you've been doing it for a long time and you're good at your job. So it's a great leveler. I said, it made me think, and I emailed him recently. I said, Pete, you know, you are right, of course. I can't take away from the fact that the amount of hard work I put in. But at the same time, there's still that inspiration. I can't write Pete's songs. I can't play the way he plays. I can't write these towering works of genius that he's written. But it's because he's good at what he does. He's been given a gift, like we all have. And if you've got a gift of creativity, cherish it, keep watering it, and keep doing it. But I do still believe that there is something else happening. You know, it's very mystical for me, and I don't want to deny that. But at the same time, the good stuff comes, and you may be the same as me, actually. The good stuff comes when you're not thinking about it.
Yes.
When you're not thinking about it. And a friend of mine said that in some ways, a good time to write is late at night when you're tired. And the ego, what he said, the ego drops away and the pure stuff starts to come through.
Yeah.
And that's when it's good. If you think about it, it then becomes all academic and you start thinking, is this going to impress other guitar players? Am I doing this right? Will it make me any money? How will it sound on an album? Will it fit in with that concept? Which is all rubbish. It should be just for its own sake. And that's when the good stuff happens, when you're not thinking about it. It really does. Pete's got this theory about creativity, and I think it's nice to talk about him, although you want to talk about me, in as much as a year ago, The Who's new album came out. I guested on one of the tracks, but you can hardly hear it because sadly the producer obviously didn't like what I did and he buried my part, unbeknownst to Pete, which I think brought Pete great pain, but there you go. And Roger said to me, he said, oh, we need to do another tour, Pete. We need to tour. Because he needs to perform, you see. Yeah. Pete not so. Pete doesn't need that because he's got his creativity. I don't really, but we'll come to that in a minute. Yeah. And he said to Roger, okay, he said, but under one condition, he said, we've got to do a new album. And I said, oh, do we have to? And he said, people think I'm a spent force, Roger. He said, I'm not. Pete's never stopped writing. And his theory, if you like, or his thoughts about it, was if you've got a creative gift, you've got to do it. Otherwise, it goes inward and it can cause a lot of psychological and possibly physical damage. If you've got this in you, you've got to let it out.
Well, this is really fascinating. I want to jump in there because there's lots of things.
I'm talking too much.
I tell you what, even though you were saying about that, because I was thinking about, as you were saying about, Pete Townshend's sort of point of view about the mechanics of it, which is true, the mechanical part of it. And in a way, if you think of the mechanics of it, it does sort of keep the intellect out of the picture in a weird sort of way, if you think of it that way. However, that last comment that you made about what he made basically about if you don't keep that flowing, it sort of backs up and causes a problem psychologically.
Mm.
You see, because in actual fact, if you just look at what psychology is, really, and this is obviously becoming much more apparent only recently, that people like Jung were deeply into the weirdest stuff and weirdest ideas. And the two books that he wrote, which were never to be published, sort of thing, the Red Book, particularly, which has come out, and there's another one called the Black Book. They're like some sort of, how can you put it, shamanic journeying manual. It's completely mixed up with Christian mysticism and all sorts of things. And this is where his psychological ideas were coming from. So when people talk about psychology now, it's like, well, you can sort of take that word and stick whatever you want to call it, spirituality in there. I mean, a lot of psychologists would have a fit of that, but the truth of it is that these sort of characters that were pioneering a lot of that thinking.
Yeah, definitely.
You're dealing with, you're dealing with the unconscious mind, whatever that is. We don't know what that is. And as soon as you try to pin that stuff down, it eludes you. As soon as you start, and music's the same, as soon as you start to pin it down, where's that idea come from? It sort of evaporates. Even to the point that when you're writing something, I liked what you said, that it's almost like you're inviting the next part to come along. I've played this bit, and what can I hear in my head that I can sing next? Not that I can play next, because that's like muscle memory. And it's almost like inviting that in. And I teach a lot of kids to songwrite, and it's one of the things that I'm doing at the moment is I've got a project, which is it's a charitable project where I'm putting songwriting techniques into schools, into junior schools, for free. And it's like cut up and using ideas where you can put random things together. And of course, they just magically come out as being poetry and songs and stuff like that. And the whole point behind this is that the creative, humans are creative machines. Machine's the wrong word. Creative entities. We create. That's what we do. And I think that's such an important point, that once we sort of stop trying to analyze and just let it happen and let it flow and do what we do naturally, which is, going back to what you're saying. And in actual fact, that's exactly what, if you just sit down and watch the creative process of somebody like, Pete Townsend working, you could sort of look at it and go, well, that's interesting. What you've just done there, where these ideas just literally come out of nowhere, seemingly. And that's been my fascination about the creative process. And I did a lot of NLP type, interviewing people and getting them to put themselves in the zone about what it's like when they create. And you ask them questions in that zone, and they never come out with something logical. When you say, so how do you know when you've got, when it's in the right space, when it's flowing? How do you know that? And they always come out with a weird thing, like I get a tingling feeling in the back of my neck, or I'm watching these Elizabethan people dancing in the room. I've had that said to me by somebody that you know. All right? And you go like...
You're going to tell me who it is?
Was Ray, actually.
Was it? Okay.
No, it actually might have been John Mills. It was John Mills, the classical guitar player who obviously Ray's good friends with.
I've met John, yeah.
And it's like, because it always puts you on the back foot when people actually come out with what's going on in their way of thinking. It's not logical. It's not like, well, I did this and it's for 4 bars and, you know, and all that sort of nonsense. It's about a feeling, or it's something they hear in their left ear, or they hear in their right ear, or it's coming from a, you know, you go like, really? It's strange, very strange.
And this is great. Are you actually? This is I feel this is what my role is as a guitarist, creator, and teacher. Is I don't. It's great when people want to play my stuff, but I say to people, no, I want to bring out your creativity. I want to bring out the creativity in other people. I find it more interesting and more fulfilling and more worthy of me as as an inspirer, if you like. You know, because I think we all can create. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to you're not going to be a genius necessarily or create this towering stuff. But creativity for its own sake is a very special and precious thing. And I was going to embark on a teaching weekend last year with a great young guitar player called Wilma Nicol. And we didn't get any take up for it, so that's another story. But you know, bringing out other people's creativity, and I think what you're doing is absolutely fantastic. And I bow down to you, because I think that is more valid than actually teaching them. Well, this is the piece you're going to learn, and you know, and next week, you know, you see, we've all gone down that road. We have to go. It's a rite of passage to try and play other people's material, because that's how we learn. We study other people's stuff. But then you say, well, that's enough of that. I now need to do my own thing. But I was never good enough, I didn't think at that time, to work out what Renborn and Yates was doing. No, it's beyond me, totally beyond me. So it's easier for me to write my own thing. And my role is to be an inspiration or a catalyst for them to bring out their own creativity. So what can you do? All right, how can we make this happen? The tough job you've got, and I've got really, is you cannot teach people to write something fantastic. You can't give that to them, but you can, if it's in them, you can help to bring it out. That's what I'm trying to say. If it's in them, you draw it out, and you inspire them, and you say, you can do anything you want. Don't be limited. Don't be limited. What did the great Wes Montgomery say? He said, the biggest advice I can give to anybody is to exploit your limitations.
Yeah.
And the first time I heard that, a little light went on in my head. I thought, this is amazing, because, and I say this to the people I teach, your limitations will then become unlimited, because you go, oh, I exploit that. And then I think, oh, I've done that now. Oh, I can exploit that bit. And it's just an ongoing daisy chain of exploitation. At the end of the day, you're going to become a better player, a better creator, a better communicator.
Exactly. Totally. I totally agree with you. Let's follow your trajectory then, Gordon. So you presumably you started playing around what, folk clubs?
No, before then I used to play at social clubs at the weekend. I used to be in a little duo with a chap, had a little band together, but it never really worked. And that's what really got me into the folk thing.
Yeah.
Being self-sufficient. And then I got hooked by the acoustic guitar. I just fell in love with the acoustic guitar, the sound of it. I mean, my first electric guitar was a Hofner Verity, which was a semi-acoustic. Then I part exchanged that, and my first crazy. My first acoustic guitar was a Hoyer 12-string, which I've still got photographs that have been in various books. So I always had this thing about the sound of the 12-string, and I think a lot of it was down to Mr. Townsend, because what he did with the 12-string was wonderful. That big chordal sound, Substitute, My Generation, all that stuff.
Yeah,
on an acoustic guitar, and so really, the band thing never really got off the ground at all. So early on in my life, I was captivated, and thank God, by the solo thing. I loved it.
Yeah. So where were you living at this time?
I was at that time. I'm a South East London boy,
Yeah.
but I was born in Kent. I was born in Paddock Wood, Tunbridge Wells area,
All right. Okay.
place called East Peckham.
Yes. Well, it's quite near me where I am at the moment.
Yeah,
At this point in time, I'm in Hadlow.
yeah. I was actually born in a place called Moatlands. You may know it. It became a very famous golf club, Moatlands.
Right.
And I visited. I've only been there once. I visualised my mum walking through that door, carrying me as a newly born child. Because
Right.
in those days, living in my mum and dad were both. Well, my dad was a Mannequin. He was born on the Isle of Sheppard,
Right.
but my mother was born in Greenwich.
Right.
But all the mothers at that time, the baby boom after the war, they were all shipped out to various parts of the country because theoretically, probably should have been born in Greenwich or Woolwich Hospital, but that had been bombed.
Yeah.
So they shipped out these mums to it's called the British Home for Mothers and Babies.
All right.
There are probably many of them around the country, but this one out to be in Kent. So my birth certificate is Kent. So I was born in Kent, but I was born up in Deptford.
Yeah.
There for 11 years, and then Deptford, Lewisham, Blackheath, Cholton, all those areas of South East London, which is incredible because little did I know at that time that we moved to a place called Blackwall Lane in Greenwich, and who lived down the road from me shortly before he moved was Albert Lee.
Yeah.
Albert Lee lived in Tunnel Avenue. Albert and I are both South East London lads.
Yeah.
Who would have thought it? When I was at secondary school, a kid used to come. He said, I went to this coffee bar last night in Charlton Village. He said, oh, it's great. He said, Albert Lee. I said, who's Albert Lee? Oh, he's fantastic. I knew about Albert Lee when I was 14.
Yeah.
He was legendary even then.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was a guitar player. And Albert and I have become good friends, So it's always that connection.
Yeah.
What's that connection?
Yeah.
So,
After Chaz Hodges died, because I did some stuff with Chaz, used to come down and do this summer school that we used to run. Well, we still run when we're allowed to. Once a year, we used to do this thing in Tunbridge School called Blues Camp, and Chaz used to come down, and for about 4 or 5 years, he'd come down and play and hang out with the people. And after Chaz died, there was a tribute thing up in Shepherd's Bush, I think it was. And Albert was playing on the bill. It was pretty amazing. It was him and sort of Clapton sort of wandered on a bit later on, but it was a nice evening.
Yeah, well, they were all mates. And of course, Albert, I literally just over a year ago, I saw Albert. I was doing a gig the night after him at the same venue, and down in Devon somewhere, I think, the venue there. And Albert, how old is Albert now? 75. He's playing as good as he ever did. He's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And Albert's the prime example of that kind of gypsy, because his background is gypsy. He was related to Gypsy Rose Lee. And of course, nobody is as good as Albert Lee doing that stuff. Yeah. Nobody. And even all these American guys, they all go, "Oh, Albert, yeah, he's like South East London boys from living in Kidbrooke Park Road, And you sort of think that's great. And of course, when Albert steps on the stage and does a solo, it's like it just blows everybody away, and it's the best thing you've ever heard.
Yeah, I know.
Because basically, as Martin Taylor said, he said, well, Albert is playing his jazz, but it's kind of jazz. And it's got that fire, it's got that gypsy fire. I love him. Love the man.
Terrific player. Yeah. So, where's the point when you start to you feel that things are beginning to take shape for you musically?
Well, really, when I listen to Bert, and it's amazing because I was about 17 or 18 when I was exposed to Bert's music. At that time, Bert was like 22, 23, which seemed like incredibly older. As you get older, the years, the gaps close up, and there's no gap. And I bought 2 albums in my life. The first one was with the Beatles, the black and white cover, And the second album was the Burt Jansch album, the Blue album, as we call it. And I still got that album, and I used to play it over and over. It's amazing. I didn't wear the blooming grooves out.
Yeah.
And I would sit and look at the cover, and at that time we both looked alike. He could have been my brother. I have a cousin called Charlie who was his double. He could have been Charlie Buckley looking at me. So I thought there was a connection, you know. And I know Dylan said the same thing about Woody Guthrie.
Yeah.
The Woody Guthrie thought, we're related. There's a connection. It's a really strange thing. And so I would listen to this stuff. And it's true, you put the record on and the atmosphere in the room would change. It was that powerful. Because Burt was a force of nature. Donovan said the same thing. Profound effect. Same with Jimmy Page. He was obsessed with Burt Jansch, like a lot of people were obsessed because of this incredible genius, this incredible creativity and what he was doing then. And like Hendrix, the flame burned very brightly initially, and then it dimmed. But that first album, God, I mean, how can you follow that? It's a masterpiece. And I felt very privileged because the man who produced that album produced my first album. My first two albums, Bill Leader. That first Burt Jansch album was recorded in Bill's living room in Camden Town, you know, and I'd spent many a time up there. Little did I know I was in that space. This is the romantic in me, you see.
Yeah.
And that's what changed my life, really. I thought, this is what can be done. And then, you may be the same, but when you're that young, you're developing an incredible rate of knots. I felt like my brain was exploding. And because your brain's still developing, you're still growing physically, and you're absorbing stuff. And it was an incredible period of creativity. And it was exciting, which led on to me making my first album, which, apart from this, here's a confession here, and I don't care who hears it. Apart from the guitar playing, it was pretty good, I guess. I'm embarrassed by it because the songs were dreadful. I really hadn't found a vocal style. I thought I was trying to sound like Burt Jansch. I thought my guitar playing was like him, but my vocal style was, I don't know what. It wasn't me, and it's probably more akin to Townsend than it was to Burt and the Beatles, you know. So it was all in there. And there's a record company just re-released the album. And in fact, there's a chap recently got in touch with me. He said, I've got the album. He said, I'm going to be playing on my radio show. He said, could we do a podcast and you can chat about the album? I said, no, I don't want to talk about the album. I'm embarrassed by it, but I'm so pleased that people can still get something out of it. But the irony is, Vic, that I still play pieces from that period. Lucifer's Cage was written in 69. Fast Approaching was written in 68 on the first album, and I just about still play it. So what I had then, I'm getting all enthusiastic now, and
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, was an energy, a very intense energy that was born out of my upbringing, born out of a desire to be something, to be somebody, and it was a period of self-discovery. You know, music gave me everything. It gave me self-respect. It gave me a vision. It gave me a future. It gave me an identity. You know, and I'm still in wonder of it. I mean, how can a 15-year-old kid, right, let's call it 15, right, with nothing, suddenly become this bloke called Gordon Giltrap who's got an MBE? I mean, how did that happen?
Yeah,
it's crazy. I'm still in wonder of it.
Yeah.
You know, self-taught, homemade. Nobody else showed me anything. And I've been very privileged to make a living out of what I love for 54 years. And all I ever wanted to do at that time was to make an album.
Yeah.
I wanted to make a record, something to leave behind.
Yeah.
But even then, I was aware of time passing and that sense of history. So I need to leave something behind. But of course, you do the first album, and then I suppose the ego rises within you. You say, well, I can do better than that. Let's do another one. Well, I can do better than that. And then you go on and on and on. But it really wasn't until 1975, 76 when I really discovered my true self with an album called Visionary, or The Visionary.
Yeah.
But up until then, I thought I was a fairly good singer-songwriter, and I kind of believed in what I did. And I did an album for Philips Records in 73, Philips Phonogram. And there's a chap called Peter Robinson who's the A&R man there, and I had a meeting with him. He said, you know, Your songs are very pleasant, Gordon. He said you've got quite a nice voice. He said, but when you really ring them bells, he said, it's when you play the guitar. And I was shocked, and I said, really? Because I always thought the instrumentals were there as a filler in between the songs.
Yeah.
But little did I know, it was the major part of this gift that I've got. And I thought, he's right. Shut your mouth and just play the bloody guitar, you know? And what was fairly apparent at that time was I would agonize over a song or a lyric for weeks. I thought, while I'm doing this, I'll write an instrumental. I'll write another one. And so the tunes are easy to write at that time, but not the song. So something was telling me, knock it on the head, Gordon.
Well, that's interesting because it's almost like that comment you made earlier about Burt Yanch, you know, that about what it is that people do that becomes the, you know, they're good at what they do, if you see what I mean. And there's not necessarily an awful lot of other things outside of that. And maybe that's what tends to happen in the end, you know, like for you, somebody else can come along and look at that and spot it, that this is the thing that really resonates and sets you apart from other people, is your guitar playing. And you might not realize that yourself, because there are lots of cases, aren't there, of very famous songs that would never have been released if it was just left to the artist. The songs that they didn't particularly like that became actually the thing that made them. Billy Joel's Just the Way You Are, Roxanne.
Yeah.
You know, that was one that they didn't think was going to be, they didn't want that to be a single. It was Miles Copeland turned around and said, no, that's, and Carlos Santana's Samba Party, they didn't like the song. You know, you look at that and you go, well, what happened? That's the one.
Because the artist is too close to it.
Exactly. Thanks to Gordon for that. The second episode will be following on very, very shortly, as soon as I get a chance to edit that. All right. So speak to you then.